On my first night at the Clinton Road Tollbooth, the headlights died. Not mine, all of them. Cars just blinked out as they reached the bend, swallowed by the dark like someone had erased them. Then I saw it. A small figure standing on the old bridge, bare feet dangling over the black water. The road was empty. No engines, no wind. Just the sound of coins splashing where there shouldn't have been any ripples. When the boy finally turned his head, his eyes didn't shine like in ghost stories. They absorbed the light. Every bulb in the booth dimmed until I could see my own reflection in that darkness. And it was smiling, but I wasn't. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name's Danny Torino, and 3 months ago I was living in a studio apartment above Gino's Pizza on Main Street in Patterson, surviving on day-old slices and whatever tips I could scrape together, delivering for DoorDash. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. Bright orange paper that might as well have been a death sentence. My cousin Vinny mentioned the toll booth job during Sunday dinner at my aunt's house in Clifton. "Easy money," he said, twirling spaghetti around his fork. "Night shift, minimum wage plus hazard pay. All you gotta do is sit there and collect tolls." Hazard pay for a toll booth seemed weird, but I wasn't in a position to ask questions. West Milford sits in the northwest corner of New Jersey, where the suburbs give way to thick forests and forgotten lakes. Clinton Road cuts through it like a scar. 10 miles of asphalt that locals either avoid completely or drive with their doors locked and windows up. I'd heard the stories growing up: phantom trucks, ghost children, cult meetings in the woods. Urban legends, I figured. The kind of stuff teenagers make up to scare each other. The toll booth squats at the southern entrance like a concrete tumor, painted that sick institutional green you see in old hospitals. When I showed up for training, the day supervisor, Mrs. Kowalski, handed me a laminated sheet with 7 protocols typed in courier font. Her fingers shook as she passed it over. "Follow these exactly," she said, glancing toward the tree line. "Tommy Ricci lasted 3 weeks before he quit. Said the job wasn't worth his sanity." She paused, wiping sweat from her forehead, despite the October chill. Frank Marinelli made it 2 months, but he started talking to himself near the end. Conversations with people who weren't there. I folded the paper and slipped it into my back pocket. "What happened to them?" "Tommy works at Home Depot now. Seems normal enough." Her eyes darted to the booth, then back to me. Frank doesn't work anywhere anymore. His wife brings him groceries twice a week. He won't leave the house after sunset. That should have been my cue to walk away. But my landlord wanted 3 months back rent, and the gas company had already sent their final notice. Sometimes desperation makes cowards out of smart men, and sometimes it makes fools out of cowards. I guess I fell into the second category. The first rule seemed harmless enough. Never look directly at the water under Cross Castle Bridge between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. I'd driven past that bridge a dozen times during my interview week, a crumbling stone arch that spanned the narrow creek. Local kids called it Dead Man's Curve because of all the accidents, but the real name came from some long-dead railroad baron who'd built it in the 1920s. The creek beneath ran maybe 3 feet deep on a good day. Hardly worth worrying about. My shift started at 10 p.m. Mrs. Kowalski left me with a thermos of coffee, a portable radio that only picked up AM static, and a metal cash box with exactly $47 in mixed bills. The booth felt smaller at night, walls pressing in like a phone booth from the old days. A single fluorescent tube overhead gave everything a sickly yellow tint. The first car rolled up at 10:15, a rusted Chevy Malibu with Pennsylvania plates. The driver, an elderly man with liver spots on his hands, passed me $2 without making eye contact. "You knew?" he asked. First night?" He glanced toward the bridge, then back at me. "Read the rules, son. All of them. Twice." The Malibu puttered away, taillights disappearing around the bend. Traffic stayed light until around 10:45, when 3 teenagers in a modified Honda pulled up. The driver had that cocky smirk kids get when they think they know something adults don't. "Yo, you seen anything weird yet?" The passenger leaned out the window, grinning. "Like the phantom truck or the ghost boy?" "Just collecting tolls," I said, holding out my hand. The driver tossed me a crumpled 5. "Keep the change, man. You're gonna need luck working this place." They peeled out, engine backfiring like gunshots. By 11 p.m., the road had gone quiet. I pulled out the laminated sheet and read through the protocols again. Never look directly at the water under Cross Castle Bridge between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. If a child approaches the booth alone, collect no toll. Offer them the emergency phone. Cars without headlights are not cars. Do not acknowledge them. The radio will play music that doesn't exist. Turn it off immediately. If someone pays with coins that feel cold, count them 3 times before accepting. Should you hear your name called from the woods, it is not for you. Lock the booth door at midnight. Open it only for vehicles with New Jersey plates. So before we go further into this story, I would like to inform the viewers that I now post 2 stories on alternate days. I hope you enjoy more frequent uploads. For our channel members, the second story is uploaded a few hours in advance. Click the join button to become a member. Also, if you'd like to share one of your stories or would like to be featured in a story, you can comment, or share the story on our own subreddit in the description. That's all. Now let's continue with the story. I'd memorized them during training, but reading them again in the booth's cramped space made my stomach twist. These weren't safety guidelines. They were survival instructions. At 11:20, a Lincoln Continental approached with 1 working headlight. The driver wore a Yankees cap pulled low, face hidden in shadow. He handed me exact change, $2 in quarters that felt like they'd been sitting in a freezer. "Cold night," he said. I counted the coins once, twice, 3 times as instructed. They warmed in my palm as I dropped them into the cash box. "Take care out there." The Lincoln disappeared into the darkness, and I realized I hadn't heard the engine fade. It had just stopped, like someone had muted the world. That's when I noticed the radio crackling to life. A woman's voice drifted from the speaker, soft, melodic, singing words I couldn't quite catch. The tune felt familiar, like something my grandmother might have hummed while cooking Sunday gravy. But the language was wrong. Not Italian, not Spanish, something older. My hand hovered over the power button as the voice grew clearer. She was singing about water, about children who never came home, about bridges that remembered every secret whispered on their spans. The melody wrapped around my thoughts like smoke, and for a moment I forgot where I was. Then I remembered Rule 4. I slammed the radio off, but the silence that followed felt worse than the phantom music. Outside, the bridge loomed 30 yards away, its stone arches barely visible in the booth's weak light. The creek beneath whispered against its banks, and I swear, just for a second, I almost looked down at the water. The silence stretched for 20 minutes before the next car arrived. I'd been checking my watch every few seconds, fighting the urge to glance toward the bridge. The creek's murmur had grown louder, or maybe I was just paying attention to sounds I'd normally ignore. A red Subaru Outback pulled up, windshield fogged with condensation. The driver rolled down her window, a woman in her 30s with a hospital ID badge clipped to her scrubs. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes from working double shifts. $2, I said, offering my usual smile. She fumbled through her purse, pulling out a handful of change. As she counted coins into my palm, her fingers brushed mine. They were warm, normal. Relief washed over me. "You work at St. Joseph's?" I asked, nodding toward her badge. "Emergency room. Just finished a 16-hour shift." She rubbed her eyes. "Figured I'd take the scenic route home instead of Route 23. Sometimes the quiet helps me decompress." I wanted to warn her about Clinton Road's reputation, tell her to stick to the main highways after midnight. But what would I say? Don't drive here because phantom children might flag you down. She'd think I was crazy. "Drive safe," I said instead. Her taillights disappeared around the curve, and I was alone again. The booth felt smaller, walls pressing closer. I pulled out my phone to check the time. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until I had to lock the door. That's when I heard the footsteps. Soft at first, like someone walking on wet leaves. But there were no leaves on the pavement, and the sound came from the bridge direction. I leaned forward, squinting through the booth's dirty windows. A small figure emerged from the shadows near the creek bank. A boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing what looked like a soaked t-shirt and jeans. His bare feet made no sound as he stepped onto the asphalt, but I could still hear those phantom footsteps echoing from somewhere else entirely. My throat went dry. Rule 2. If a child approaches the booth alone, collect no toll. Offer them the emergency phone. The boy walked toward me with that strange, measured pace children use when they're trying not to get in trouble. As he got closer, I could see his clothes weren't just wet, they were dripping. Water pooled around his feet with each step, creating dark circles on the pavement that shouldn't exist. He stopped about 10 feet from the booth window and looked up at me. His face was pale, normal except for his eyes. They held depths that didn't belong in a child's face, like staring into a well at midnight. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than intended. He didn't answer, just stood there, water dripping from his clothes, creating a puddle that reflected stars despite the cloudy sky. I reached for the emergency phone mounted on the booth's back wall, a red handset connected to the local police station. But when I lifted it to my ear, there was no dial tone, just the sound of water lapping against stone. "Where are your parents?" I tried again. The boy tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of deep currents. "They went under a long time ago." Before I could respond, headlights appeared in the distance. The boy glanced toward the approaching vehicle, then back at me. "Tell them I'm still waiting," he said. Then he turned and walked back toward the bridge, each step leaving those wet footprints that gleamed like oil slicks. A pickup truck rumbled up to the booth, New Jersey plates, both headlights working. The driver was a local guy I recognized from Patterson, Tony something. He worked construction and always paid with crumpled bills that smelled like sawdust. "Evening, Danny. Quiet night." I looked toward the bridge, but the boy was gone. Only the wet footprints remained, already starting to fade. "Yeah, real quiet." Tony handed me 2 singles. "You see that kid earlier? Thought I saw someone walking around down by the creek." "Just collecting tolls," I said, the lie sitting heavy in my stomach. He nodded and drove off, leaving me staring at the empty road. My watch read 11:58. 2 minutes until lockdown. I walked to the booth door, a heavy steel thing with 3 deadbolts, and started turning the locks. The metallic clicks echoed louder than they should have, like gunshots in the confined space. As the final bolt slid home, I felt something shift in the air around me. The booth was now my sanctuary and my prison for the next 6 hours. Outside, the world had changed. Colors seemed muted, shadows deeper. Even the overhead light felt dimmer, casting everything in sepia tones like an old photograph. I settled back into my chair and tried to focus on anything except the bridge. At 12:15, I heard it. My name, carried on wind that wasn't there. Danny. The voice came from the tree line beyond the bridge, soft and pleading. It sounded like my mother calling me home for dinner when I was 10. That mixture of love and exasperation that only parents can manage. Danny, come here. I need to show you something. My hand moved toward the door locks before I caught myself. Rule 6. Should you hear your name called from the woods, it is not for you. But it sounded so much like her, so much like home. And I hadn't talked to my mother in 3 months, not since the fight about my job prospects and life choices. The voice called again, closer now, and this time I heard something else underneath. A wet, gurgling quality that made my skin crawl. I turned the radio back on, needing any distraction. Static filled the booth, then cleared into a talk show from the 1950s. A man with a transatlantic accent was interviewing someone about bridge construction techniques. They discussed the psychological effects of crossing water, how humans instinctively fear what lies beneath. This wasn't phantom music. This was something else entirely. I let it play, focusing on the voices from another era rather than the one calling my name from the darkness outside. The vintage radio show droned on about engineering marvels and the psychology of crossing water. I kept the volume low, just loud enough to drown out whatever might be calling from the woods. The host's voice had that tinny quality of old recordings, but underneath it I caught something else. A rhythm that matched the creek's flow beneath the bridge. At 12:43, a vehicle approached without headlights. It rolled up the slope like a shadow given weight, a dark sedan that seemed to absorb what little light the booth cast. No engine noise, no tire hum against asphalt, just the whisper of something moving through the night. Rule 3 echoed in my head. Cars without headlights are not cars. Do not acknowledge them. The thing, I couldn't think of it as a vehicle anymore, stopped at the exact spot where cars normally paused for tolls. Through the passenger window, I glimpsed the outline of a driver. Tall, wearing what might have been a suit from another decade. His hands rested on the steering wheel, too still, like a mannequin positioned for display. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the cash box, the thermos, anything except the presence waiting outside. The booth's walls felt paper thin. Whatever sat in that phantom car could probably reach through them if it wanted to. Seconds stretched like taffy. My watch ticked so loud it might as well have been a hammer-striking anvil. The radio host continued his discussion about water's psychological impact on travelers, his voice now carrying an edge I hadn't noticed before. Then the not car moved on, rolling away without sound or exhaust fumes. I didn't watch it go. My hands shook as I reached for the coffee thermos. The liquid had gone cold despite the insulated container, and it tasted like pennies. I spit it back into the cup and checked my watch. 1:07 a.m. Still 2 hours before I could safely look toward the bridge. 3 cars with proper headlights passed through in the next hour. A delivery truck heading to Newark, driven by a Filipino guy named Rico, who always paid with exact change. A Honda Pilot with Connecticut plates. Some college kid driving back to Rutgers probably. And another pickup, this one with Pennsylvania plates, and a driver who kept glancing in his rearview mirror like something was following him. "You okay?" I asked as he handed me 2 crumpled dollars. "Just, you ever get the feeling something's watching you?" He rubbed the back of his neck. Been driving this road for 20 years, and lately it feels different, like it's paying attention. I thought about the ghost boy, the phantom radio, the thing pretending to be a car. Maybe take Route 23 next time. He laughed, but it came out hollow. Yeah, maybe. After he left, the night settled into that dead quiet period between 2 and 3 a.m. when even the insects stopped making noise. I'd learned about this hour working late shifts at the pizza place, the time when emergency calls spike and nurses chart more deaths. The boundary time, my grandmother used to call it, when the wall between worlds grows thin. The radio show had shifted to a different program. A woman now discussed local folklore, her voice carrying that same archival quality. She talked about bridges in New Jersey, how they collect stories like sediment. Cross Castle Bridge specifically, she noted, had been the site of 17 documented drownings since 1923. The most recent occurred in 1987, she continued. 8-year-old Michael Calabro fell from the north span while fishing with his father. His body was never recovered, though witnesses reported seeing a child matching his description near the bridge for months afterward. The ghost boy had never told me his name, but somehow I knew she was talking about him. The child who'd asked me to tell someone he was still waiting. My watch read 2:47 a.m., 13 more minutes before I could safely look at the water. The radio woman's voice faded into static, then silence. I reached for the power switch, but stopped when new voices emerged from the speaker. Children's voices. Dozens of them, maybe more. They weren't singing the strange melody I'd heard earlier. They were talking all at once, a babble of young voices sharing secrets and fears and dreams that would never be fulfilled. Mama said I'd be home for dinner. Water's so cold. Why is it so cold? Can't find the way back up. Someone should tell them we're still here. I punched the power button, killing the voices mid-sentence. The booth plunged into silence so complete it felt like being buried alive. Even the creek had stopped its constant murmur. That's when I realized what the woman on the radio had really been telling me. 17 drownings, 17 children who'd never made it home. And Michael Calabro wasn't the only one still waiting by the bridge. My watch hit 2:59, 60 more seconds. Outside, something moved near the tree line. Not walking, floating, drifting between the oaks like smoke given form. Then another shape joined it, and another. Small figures emerging from the woods, all heading toward the bridge with that same measured pace I'd seen from the boy earlier. They gathered at the bridge's edge, maybe a dozen children in clothes from different decades. A girl in a 1950s dress. A boy wearing bell-bottom jeans from the 70s. Others in more recent fashion, their garments all sharing that same waterlogged quality. They stood facing the booth, waiting. My watch displayed 3 a.m. exactly. I looked down at the water. The creek ran black as motor oil, reflecting nothing. But in its depths, I saw lights, dozens of them, tiny and distant like stars fallen into an inverted sky. Each light pulsed with its own rhythm, and I realized they weren't lights at all. They were eyes. The eyes of every child who'd ever gone under and never surfaced, staring up through 20 feet of water that couldn't possibly be that deep. Their faces floated just beneath the surface, preserved by whatever force kept their spirits anchored to this place. Michael Calabro waved at me from among them, his mouth moving in words the water swallowed. But I could read his lips. Tell them we're still here. The other children on the bridge raised their hands in farewell, then walked backward into the trees, fading like morning mist. Only Michael remained, standing at the bridge's center. He pointed down at the water, then at me. then made a gesture I recognized from my childhood. Pinky swear. A promise between kids that couldn't be broken. I pressed my palm against the booth window and nodded. The clock struck 3:01, and when I looked again, the bridge was empty. The creek ran clear and shallow, just 3 feet of ordinary water reflecting the booth's yellow light. But I'd seen the truth underneath, and Michael's message burned in my memory like a brand. The remainder of my shift crawled by like a fever dream. After 3 a.m., traffic slowed to almost nothing, just the occasional trucker or shift worker taking the back roads home. Each vehicle that approached felt normal, solid, reassuringly real after what I'd witnessed at the bridge. But Michael's message haunted me. Tell them we're still here. Tell who? The families who'd lost children decades ago? The local authorities who'd long since closed those cases? I thought about Mrs. Kowalski's warning about Frank Marinelli, how he'd started talking to people who weren't there. Maybe he'd seen the same thing I had. Maybe he'd tried to tell someone. At 4:15 a.m., a white van pulled up with New Jersey plates. The driver was a woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a St. Anthony medal around her neck, the patron saint of lost things. Her hands trembled as she counted out exact change. "You're new," she said, studying my face through the window. "Started tonight." She nodded slowly. "I drive this road every month. Same date, same time. October 15th. Her voice carried the weight of old grief. 36 years now. October 15th, 1987. The night Michael Calabro drowned. "My grandson," she continued, though I hadn't asked. "Michael. He'd be 44 now if..." She trailed off, staring past me toward the bridge. "They never found him. Said he must have been swept downstream, but I knew better. This place keeps what it takes." My throat felt like sandpaper. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Mrs. Calabro," she said, extending her hand through the window. "Rose Calabro. And you don't need to be sorry, son. Just, if you ever see anything strange out here, anything that doesn't make sense, remember that some things need to be witnessed, even if nobody believes you." She drove away before I could respond, taillights disappearing around the bend. But her words echoed in my head. Some things need to be witnessed. The eastern sky was starting to lighten when my replacement arrived. Joey Benedetto, a kid from Bloomfield who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He'd worked the weekend shifts for 6 months, long enough to develop the hollow-eyed look that came with this job. "How was your first night?" he asked, settling into the chair. I thought about lying, telling him it was quiet and boring. But Michael's grandmother's words stopped me. "The rules aren't suggestions, Joey. They're survival guides." He glanced at the laminated sheet taped to the wall. "Which ones?" "All of them. Especially the one about not looking at the water before 3 a.m. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. "And if you hear children's voices on the radio, turn it off immediately." Joey's face went pale. "You heard them too?" "Too? The kids. They talk sometimes, late at night. Always sound like they're trying to tell you something important, but the words get all mixed up." He rubbed his arms like he was cold. I thought I was going crazy. I stopped at the doorway. How many others know about this? Nobody talks about it directly. But Tommy Ricci mentioned hearing voices before he quit. "And Frank?" Joey shook his head. "Frank tried to help them. Started leaving toys by the bridge, food, things like that. Said they were hungry and scared and just wanted to go home." "What happened?" "They followed him. Not just here. Everywhere. His house, his car, the grocery store. Everywhere Frank went, dead children followed. His wife said he'd sit at the kitchen table having conversations with empty chairs, promising them he'd find a way to help. The morning air felt crisp against my skin as I walked to my car, but I couldn't shake the chill spreading through my chest. Frank had tried to help the spirits, and it had consumed his life. But ignoring them felt wrong too, especially after meeting Michael's grandmother. I drove home slowly, taking Route 23 instead of following Clinton Road to its end. My apartment looked different in the dawn light, smaller, shabbier, but gloriously normal. No phantom voices, no ghost children, no shadows that moved wrong. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces in the water. Dozens of children trapped beneath the surface, staring up at a world they'd never rejoin. Michael among them, still waiting for someone to acknowledge his existence. Around noon, I gave up on sleep and drove to the Patterson Public Library. The reference librarian, a stern woman named Mrs. Patterson, helped me locate newspaper archives dating back to the 1920s. What I found made my stomach turn. The drownings at Cross Castle Bridge weren't accidents. They were too regular, too consistent. Every few years, another child would fall in and disappear. The articles always used similar language. Tragic accident, swift current, body never recovered. But the pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. 1923, Sarah Kowalski, age 7. 1931, Anthony Torino, age 9, my own surname, possibly a distant relative. 1945, Margaret O'Brien, age 6. 1954, David Petrucci, age 8. 1963, Lisa Romano, age 10. 1971, Kevin Walsh, age 7. 1979, Jennifer Gonzalez, age 9. 1987, Michael Calabro, age 8. The list went on, extending right up to 1999, when a girl named Amanda Chen had supposedly fallen through thin ice during an unusually cold winter. After that, the drownings stopped, or at least they stopped being reported as drownings. I photocopied everything and spread the articles across my kitchen table. 17 children over 76 years, all at the same bridge, all with bodies never recovered. The local authorities had never connected the dots, treating each incident as an isolated tragedy. But someone else had noticed the pattern. A letter to the editor from 1988, published in the West Milford Messenger, caught my attention. To the families who have lost children at Cross Castle Bridge, I want you to know that your children are not forgotten. They remain at that place, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for someone to tell their stories. I have seen them myself, and they are not at peace. Until we recognize what that bridge truly is, a feeding ground for something ancient and hungry, our children will continue to disappear. The letter was signed by Francis Marinelli. Frank, the previous toll booth operator, who'd lost his sanity trying to help the spirits. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my wallet. Frank had seen the truth 35 years ago, but nobody had listened. Maybe it was time someone tried again. That evening, I called Mrs. Kowalski and told her I wanted to work extra shifts. She sounded surprised. Most people quit within the first week. "You sure about this, Danny?" "The job gets harder, not easier." "I'm sure," I said, staring at the photocopied articles spread across my table. "There are things that need to be done." My second week at the toll booth began with a storm. October rain hammered the booth's metal roof like bullets, turning the creek beneath Cross Castle Bridge into a churning torrent. Water levels rose higher than I'd ever seen, lapping at the bridge's lower stones with hungry persistence. I'd spent the intervening days researching each of the 17 children, tracking down surviving family members through obituaries and social media. What I discovered painted a picture darker than simple accidents. These families had been destroyed by their losses, divorces, suicides, mental breakdowns. The bridge didn't just claim children, it devoured entire bloodlines. Tonight felt different from the start. The air hummed with electricity, and shadows moved wrong even before sunset. I brought something with me this time, a digital voice recorder, the kind journalists use for interviews. If Frank Marinelli had lost his mind talking to empty chairs, maybe having proof would help. My first customer arrived at 10:30, a nervous teenager in a Honda Accord with Massachusetts plates. College kid, probably heading to a party somewhere in the Pine Barrens. His hands shook as he counted out change. "This road gives me the creeps," he muttered. "GPS said it was the fastest route, but I swear I've been driving in circles for an hour." "How's that possible?" I asked, accepting his toll. "I keep passing the same landmarks. That dead tree with the twisted branches, the old barn with no roof. Like the road's looping back on itself." He glanced nervously at the bridge. "My girlfriend's waiting for me in Princeton. I should have been there already." After he drove away, I checked my watch. 10:32 p.m. The kid had been driving for an hour, but he'd only been on Clinton Road for 2 minutes. Either he was lying, confused, or something was manipulating time around here. The storm intensified as midnight approached. Rain lashed the booth's windows, turning the outside world into a blur of darkness and motion. I followed protocol, locking the doors at exactly 12 o'clock, but the deadbolts felt inadequate against whatever prowled these woods during the witching hours. At 12:47, the phantom car returned. Same dark sedan, same absence of headlights or engine noise. But this time, it didn't just pass through. It stopped at the booth and sat there, engine silent, while rain beaded on its windows without leaving streaks. I forced myself to stare at the cash box, counting bills to keep my mind occupied. The not car waited for 17 minutes. I know because I watched the clock secondhand sweep around, again and again, each tick echoing like a gunshot in the booth's cramped space. When it finally moved on, the temperature inside dropped 20 degrees in an instant. By 1 a.m., the radio had started its nightly performance. Tonight's programming came from even deeper in the past, a 1940s variety show featuring child performers. A girl with a crystalline voice sang "Old Devil Moon," while a boy provided harmony. Their duet was beautiful and heartbreaking, voices full of innocence and hope. Then I recognized the girl's name when the host introduced her. Margaret O'Brien, age 6. The same Margaret O'Brien who drowned in 1945. I let the show play, pulling out my voice recorder and setting it on the booth's counter. The children sang 3 more songs, standards from the era, performed with the skill of seasoned professionals. Between numbers, they chattered about their families, their dreams, their plans for Christmas morning. Margaret wanted a doll with real hair. The boy, who called himself Davy, hoped Santa would bring him a bicycle. They talked about swimming in the creek during summer, how the water felt cool against their skin on hot afternoons, how they'd made a game of holding their breath underwater, seeing who could stay down longest. "We're still playing that game," Margaret said during a station break. "But we can't come up anymore. The water won't let us." "Someone should tell our mamas we're okay," Davy added. "We're not scared anymore. Just lonely." The show faded into static, then silence. I stopped the recording and played it back. Nothing. Just the sound of rain and my own breathing. Whatever voices came through that radio existed only in the moment, defying capture. At 2:15, I heard footsteps on the booth's roof. Small feet, moving in careful circles above my head. The metal groaned under the weight, though logically nothing should have been able to reach the roof. The footsteps paused directly overhead, then resumed their circuit, around and around, like a child playing a solitary game. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, rain immediately soaking through my jacket. The booth's roof was empty, but water pooled in small footprints that led to the edge and stopped. I followed the trail with my light, but it ended at the roof's rim with no ladder, no tree branches, no explanation for how someone could have climbed up there. When I returned inside, shivering and dripping, Michael Calabro was waiting in the booth. He sat in my chair, water streaming from his clothes onto the floor. His dark hair clung to his forehead, and his eyes held that same depth I'd seen before, like looking into a well at midnight. This time, though, he seemed more solid, more present. "You've been asking about us," he said. His voice carried the echo of deep water. "Your grandmother came by, Rose Calabro. She still drives this road looking for you." Michael's face crumpled with grief that no 8-year-old should ever carry. "I know. I see her every month. She brings flowers and throws them in the water, but they just float away. I want to tell her I'm here, but she can't hear me anymore." "Why can't you leave? What keeps you bound to this place?" "The thing under the bridge. It's old, older than the road, older than the trees. It feeds on drowning, on the fear and panic when lungs fill with water and hearts stop beating. We're not dead. We're dinner, being slowly digested over decades." The booth's temperature plummeted. My breath came out in white puffs as Michael continued. "It's getting stronger. Every few years it needs another child. But lately, people avoid the road. Families drive the long way around, rather than risk their kids near the water. It's getting hungry." "What does that mean?" "It means the rules are changing. Soon it won't wait for accidents. It'll start taking adults, pulling them down to join us, starting with the people who work closest to its domain." The implication hit me like a physical blow. The Tollbooth operators. Tommy Ricci felt it calling to him. That's why he quit. Frank Marinelli heard us pleading for help and tried to save us, but that just made him a better target. The thing twisted his mind until he couldn't tell reality from nightmare. "Then why are you warning me?" Michael stood, water still dripping from his clothes in defiance of physics. "Because you're different. You see us, but you're not going crazy. You're researching, planning, thinking. Maybe you can find a way to stop it." "How?" "The bridge isn't just concrete and stone. It's built on a sacred site, a place where the indigenous people once performed water rituals. The thing sleeping under there was bound by those ceremonies, contained but not destroyed. If someone could remember the old ways, perform the proper rites." His form began to fade as my watch approached 2:45. "Find Anna Whitehorse," he whispered. "She knows the old stories. She can teach you what was forgotten." "Where do I find her?" But Michael was already gone, leaving only wet footprints and the scent of creek water. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, rain tapering to a steady patter against the windows. I spent the rest of my shift taking notes, documenting everything Michael had told me. Anna Whitehorse. That name felt familiar, though I couldn't place it immediately. By dawn, I had a plan forming. The bridge might be hungry and the rules might be changing, but I wasn't Frank Marinelli. I wouldn't let this thing drive me insane or add me to its collection of drowned souls. I was going to find Anna Whitehorse, learn the old ways, and give those 17 children the peace they'd been denied for decades. Finding Anna Whitehorse took 3 days of dead ends and phone calls. The name had triggered a memory from my childhood, something my grandmother mentioned about the old families who lived in these woods before developers carved them up with roads and housing developments. After exhausting online searches and local directories, I finally found her through the Ramapo Mountain Indians Cultural Center in Mahwah. Anna lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of Ringwood, where the Ramapo Mountains rise like sleeping giants above the suburban sprawl. The dirt road leading to her property wound through stands of oak and maple trees that seemed older than the surrounding forest, their trunks thick enough to hide behind. I knocked on her door at sunset, carrying the folder of newspaper clippings and photographs I'd assembled. When she answered, I was struck by her eyes, dark and sharp, missing nothing. She had to be 70, but she moved with the grace of someone half her age. "You're the boy working at the Death Bridge," she said before I could introduce myself. I wondered when someone would finally come asking the right questions. Her cabin was small, but felt larger inside than the dimensions suggested. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled with volumes on local history, folklore, and what looked like handwritten journals. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with sage and sweetgrass. "How did you know I'd come?" I asked, settling into a chair beside her wood-burning stove. "The spirits have been restless lately, more active than they've been in years. When the dead start making noise, it usually means someone's finally listening." She poured tea from a ceramic pot, the liquid dark and earthy. "Tell me what you've seen." I described everything. The ghost boy, the phantom radio shows, the faces in the water, my conversation with Michael. Anna listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if confirming details she already knew. "Cross Castle Bridge was built over a sacred pool," she said when I finished. "My great-grandfather's grandfather remembered the stories. The Lenape called it Shegeweak, the place where souls drink before their journey to the afterlife. Water that deep and still was considered a doorway between worlds. Michael said something was sleeping under there, something old." Anna's expression darkened. "Not sleeping. Bound. There's a difference." She stood and pulled a leather-bound journal from the shelf, its pages yellow with age. When the railroad company started building in the 1920s, they ignored warnings from the tribal elders. Construction workers reported strange accidents, tools disappearing, equipment malfunctioning, men claiming they heard voices calling from the creek. She opened the journal to a page covered in faded ink drawings. The sketches showed a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. Serpentine, with scales that shifted between water and shadow, eyes like black pearls scattered along its length. "Mishiginabig," Anna said. "Water panther. A being that exists between elements, between life and death. Most tribal traditions have some version of this spirit, powerful, hungry, neither wholly good nor evil. The Lenape used specific ceremonies to keep it contained, offering respect and small sacrifices in exchange for safe passage across their sacred waters." "What happened when the bridge was built?" "The ceremonies stopped. The old knowledge was lost or dismissed as superstition. Without the proper bindings, the creature began to stir. It needed to feed, but it was still weak, so it started small. A child here, a child there, building strength over decades." I thought about the pattern in the newspaper clippings. 17 children over 76 years, spaced just far enough apart to avoid obvious connection. And now it's strong enough to take adults? Strong enough to change the rules entirely. The Tollbooth workers are just the beginning. Once it has enough power, it won't need to wait for victims to come to the water. It'll be able to reach anywhere its influence touches, which given enough time and feeding could extend throughout the entire watershed. The implications sent ice through my veins. The Ramapo River system fed dozens of communities across northern New Jersey. If this thing could expand its hunting ground, there has to be a way to stop it. Anna closed the journal and returned it to the shelf. The old bindings can be restored, but it requires someone willing to enter the sacred pool during the creature's feeding time. The ceremony must be performed in the water itself, at the moment when the veil between worlds is thinnest. When does it feed? The anniversary of its first kill, October 15th, tomorrow night. Same date your friend Michael drowned 36 years ago. She met my eyes with a steady gaze. It always returns to the original pattern when it's ready to evolve. My mouth went dry. What would I need to do? Anna spent the next 2 hours teaching me the ceremony. It was simpler than I'd expected. A series of offerings and spoken words meant to restore the balance between the creature's hunger and the sacred nature of the site. But simplicity didn't mean safety. The water panther will fight the binding, she warned. It'll use every trick it knows. Fear, illusion, the voices of its victims trying to convince you to stop. You'll need anchors to reality, ways to remember who you are and why you're there. She gave me a small leather pouch filled with tobacco, sweetgrass, and what looked like cornmeal. Offerings for the 4 directions, and this. She pressed a carved stone into my palm, smooth and warm despite the cabin's chill. My great-great-grandmother's protection stone. It won't stop the creature, but it might keep you grounded when everything else feels like it's falling apart. What if I fail? Then the 17 children stay trapped, and more will join them. The cycle will continue until someone stronger or more prepared attempts the binding. She paused, studying my face. But I don't think you'll fail. The spirits chose you for a reason, Danny Torino. They've been waiting decades for someone capable of hearing their message. I drove home as full darkness settled over the mountains, Anna's instructions repeating in my mind like a prayer. The ceremony had to begin exactly at midnight, performed while standing waist-deep in the creek beneath the bridge. I'd need to speak the words in Lenape, a language I'd practiced phonetically, but didn't truly understand. The next evening, I arrived at the Tollbooth 2 hours early. Mrs. Kowalski had seemed surprised when I'd volunteered for overtime on a Friday night, but she didn't question my eagerness. Halloween was still 2 weeks away, but something in the air already felt electric with approaching change. I followed my usual routine, checking supplies, testing equipment, reviewing the rules. But tonight, I'd added items to my kit: Anna's pouch of offerings, the protection stone, and a waterproof flashlight. If I survived the ceremony, I'd still need to finish my shift. At 11:30, I unlocked the booth door and stepped outside. The night was clear and cold, stars visible despite the light pollution from distant suburbs. The creek ran high from recent rains, its surface reflecting the bridge's stone arches like a dark mirror. Michael appeared as I approached the water's edge, his form more solid than I'd ever seen it. Behind him, the other children emerged from the shadows. Margaret, Davy, and 14 others, whose names I'd learned from newspaper archives. They stood in a semicircle around the bridge, watching with expressions of desperate hope. "You came," Michael said. "I made a promise. The creature knows what you're planning. It's been gathering strength all day, preparing to fight. Are you ready?" I touched the protection stone in my pocket and felt its warmth spreading through my fingers. As ready as anyone can be. The church bells in West Milford began tolling midnight, their bronze voices carrying across the darkness. I waded into the creek, gasping as ice-cold water rose around my legs, then my waist. The current tugged at my clothes with fingers that felt almost deliberate. Below the surface, something vast and ancient stirred, sensing my presence. The water began to glow with phosphorescent light, and I saw the creature rising from the depths, scales shifting between liquid and shadow, eyes like black stars scattered along its serpentine length. It was time to begin the ceremony. The creek water turned to liquid ice around my waist as the creature surfaced. What Anna had described as a water panther bore no resemblance to any earthly animal. It moved like oil given consciousness, its form shifting between scales and shadow, solid matter and flowing darkness. Eyes dotted its length like scattered obsidian, each one tracking my movements with predatory intelligence. I pulled the pouch of offerings from my jacket, fingers numb with cold. The Lenape words Anna had taught me felt foreign on my tongue, but I forced them out. Kitanitawit, Nkechi Sachema. Great Spirit, I call upon you. The creature's response was immediate. The water around me began to boil, bubbles rising from depths that couldn't possibly exist in a 3-foot creek. Steam hissed against my skin, and the phosphorescent glow intensified until I could barely see the bridge above. I scattered tobacco onto the churning surface, speaking the words for the eastern direction. The offering dissolved instantly, vanishing into the creature's bulk like drops of rain into an ocean. But something shifted in the water's temperament, a hesitation, as if the ritual had triggered ancient memories. You should not be here. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking inside my skull with the weight of centuries, not heard but felt, like pressure changes before a storm. The children deserve peace, I said aloud, continuing the ceremony. I turned to face north, scattering sweetgrass while reciting the next verse. Alanquak wuliton. All things have spirits. The creature's form writhed beneath me, coils brushing against my legs like massive snakes testing prey. Where it touched, my skin went numb, then burned with cold that felt like flame. But the protection stone in my pocket pulsed with warmth, keeping the worst of its influence at bay. They chose their fate. Children who swim too deep, who ignore their parents' warnings. Natural selection in its purest form. Natural selection doesn't explain 76 years of pattern killings, I shot back, scattering cornmeal toward the west. The creature recoiled from this offering more violently, its serpentine length thrashing until waves lapped against the bridge's lower stones. That's when the visions began. The creek around me transformed into different water, a swimming pool behind a split-level house in Patterson. I was 8 years old again, had been showing off for my cousins during a family barbecue. I'd held my breath underwater, staying down until my lungs burned, until panic clawed at my throat and black spots danced behind my eyelids. But in this vision, I didn't surface. I floated face down while my relatives laughed and talked above, unaware that little Danny Torino had drowned in 3 feet of chlorinated water. The creature was showing me how easily it could have taken me decades ago, how thin the line between survival and suffocation really was. I fought through the illusion, gripping the protection stone until its edges cut into my palm. Nanha ekin wataki menin. We remember the old ways. The vision shattered, and I was back in the creek. But now Michael stood beside me in the water, his ghost form solid enough to cast ripples. The other children had waded in too, forming a circle around the creature's writhing bulk. "You're not alone," Michael said. "We've been waiting to help." The water panther's eyes fixed on the ghost children, with something like hunger mixed with frustration. "Mine," it hissed. "They belong to me. Centuries of feeding, of growing strong on their terror and final breaths. You cannot take what was freely given. They weren't given freely, I said, pulling out the final offering, a small piece of copper Anna had blessed with tobacco smoke. They were taken through deception and manipulation. I held the copper high, speaking the words for the southern direction. This was the crucial moment, the binding phrase that would either restore the old protection or trigger the creature's full wrath. Mekingwak watakin, watakish linukich, akin watakimanin, wunakish nukish. Water spirits return to deep places. We remember the agreements, we honor the boundaries. The copper blazed with heat in my hand before I cast it into the churning water. Where it touched the creature's form, light erupted. Not the cold phosphorescence from before, but warm golden radiance that spread outward like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. The water panther screamed. The sound came from everywhere. The creek, the bridge stones, the very air itself vibrating with rage and pain that had built up over decades. I doubled over as the noise hammered into my skull, blood trickling from my ears. Around me, the ghost children stood firm, their combined will holding the binding circle intact. But the creature wasn't finished. It poured every ounce of accumulated power into one final assault, not on my body, but on my mind. I was drowning in a dozen different ways at once. In the Passaic River after falling through ice. In a quarry outside Princeton where I'd gone swimming with friends who never existed. In bathtubs and swimming pools and storm drains. Water filling my lungs while I struggled uselessly against currents that pulled me down into blackness. Each death felt completely real. The burning in my chest as oxygen ran out. The panic as my body convulsed, trying to expel water that kept pouring in. The final moments when struggle gave way to acceptance, when consciousness faded and the world went dark. Through it all, one thought kept me anchored. These weren't my deaths. They were memories stolen from 17 children, experiences the creature had fed on for decades. I was feeling what Margaret O'Brien felt in 1945, what Kevin Walsh experienced in 1971, what Michael Calabro endured in 1987. And if I could feel their deaths, maybe I could set them free. I focused on the protection stone, using its warmth to climb out of the drowning visions. The ceremony was complete, but something more was needed. A final act of will to seal the binding permanently. "I name you," I shouted over the creature's wailing. Sarah Kowalski, Anthony Torino, Margaret O'Brien, David Petrucci, Lisa Romano, Kevin Walsh, Jennifer Gonzalez, Michael Calabro. I recited all 17 names from memory, each one hitting the water panther like a physical blow. As I spoke their names, the ghost children began to shine with that same golden light. Their forms grew brighter and more solid, while the creature's bulk became translucent, losing definition around the edges. Amanda Chen, Timothy Brooks, Jessica Martinez. I continued through the complete list, voice hoarse but determined. With each name, another child stepped forward to place their hand on the creature's writhing form. The water panther's screams became something else, a keening wail of loss and ancient loneliness. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for it. This being had existed long before humans arrived, adapting to changing times and circumstances. But adaptation had become predation, and predation had become addiction. "Wait," it whispered as the binding took hold. "I can offer you power, knowledge of deep places, secret things hidden beneath the world. Anything you desire." "I desire justice for 17 children," I said firmly. The golden light reached critical mass. and the creature imploded. Not violently, but like a deflating balloon, its massive form collapsing inward until nothing remained but ordinary creek water, reflecting ordinary starlight. The ghost children turned to face me, their expressions peaceful for the first time since I'd met them. Michael stepped forward and extended his hand. When I shook it, his fingers felt warm and real. "Thank you," he said simply. One by one, the children walked toward the bridge and passed through its stone arches, fading into whatever realm awaited them beyond. Michael was the last to go, pausing at the water's edge. "Tell my grandmother I'm at peace now. Tell her she doesn't need to drive this road anymore." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in creek water that felt normal again. Cold, but not supernaturally so, flowing around my legs without malevolent intent. I waded back to shore and trudged toward the toll booth, exhausted but victorious. The binding had worked. The creature was contained, the children were free, and Clinton Road was just a road again. At least that's what I thought until I saw the headlights approaching. The approaching headlights belonged to Rose Calabro's white van. She pulled up to the toll booth at 12:47 a.m., exactly as she had every October 15th for 36 years. But tonight, something was different. Her hands weren't shaking as she rolled down the window. The hollow grief that had carved lines into her face seemed softer, like a weight had been lifted. "You're soaked," she said, looking at my creek-stained clothes. "Had to fix something down by the bridge." She studied my face with those sharp grandmother eyes that missed nothing. "It's quiet tonight. Really quiet. I've driven this road hundreds of times and it's never felt." She paused, searching for the right word. "Peaceful." I handed her the change from her toll, though we both knew she could have taken Route 23 and saved herself the drive. "Mrs. Calabro, I need to tell you something. About Michael." Her breath caught. "What about him?" "He's at peace now. He wanted you to know that you don't need to keep looking for him. He's safe, and he's not trapped anymore." Tears started down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "How could you possibly know that?" I thought about trying to explain. The ghost children, the binding ceremony, the creature that had fed on drowning for decades. Instead, I said, "Sometimes people just know things. And I know Michael isn't suffering." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue from her purse. "I believe you. Don't ask me why, but I do." She put the van in drive, then paused. "I won't be driving this road anymore, will I?" "I don't think you need to." Rose Calabro drove away for the final time, taking her monthly pilgrimage with her. I watched her taillights disappear around the bend, then returned to the booth to finish my shift. The remaining hours passed without incident. No phantom radio shows, no ghost children, no cars without headlights. Just normal late-night traffic. A few truckers, some shift workers heading home, teenagers taking the long way back from parties. The rules still applied, but they felt different now. Less like survival instructions and more like respectful guidelines for a sacred place. When Joey Benedetto arrived for the morning shift, he immediately noticed the change. "Something's different," he said, settling into the chair. "The air feels lighter." "Good different or bad different?" "Good. Definitely good. Like when a fever finally breaks." He glanced toward the bridge. "Did something happen last night?" "Just a quiet shift," I said, gathering my things. I drove home as dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. The newspaper archives and photocopied articles still covered my kitchen table, but they felt like historical documents now rather than active case files. 17 children had found peace, and their families could finally begin to heal. Over the following weeks, the changes became more apparent. Tommy Ricci stopped by the toll booth one evening, curious about why he'd been sleeping better. Frank Marinelli's wife called Mrs. Kowalski to report that her husband had started leaving the house again, taking short walks around their neighborhood for the first time in years. The drowning pattern at Cross Castle Bridge was broken. I'd kept my promise to Michael and his friends, restored the old protections, and honored the sacred nature of the site. But I kept working the night shift. Not because I had to. Other jobs had become available, better paying positions with normal hours and no supernatural hazards. I stayed because someone needed to watch over the bridge, to ensure the binding held, to remember what had happened there. Anna Whitehorse visited once, bringing fresh tobacco and sage to refresh the protections. She pronounced the site stable, the balance restored between the creature's ancient hunger and the land's spiritual significance. "The old ways work," she said simply, "when people remember to listen." I still carry the protection stone in my pocket and follow the 7 rules religiously. Not because I fear the water panther's return, but because respect for sacred places should outlast the dangers they once harbored. Clinton Road is just a road again, but it's also more than that. It's a reminder that some stories are too important to forget, and some promises too sacred to break.